What's going on, guys? This is the Fullstack Bro. In today's video, we're going to talk about 6 bad habits of writing code. Now, if whether you're a beginner or you're a senior developer, you're going to have some coding standards. And basically what that means is you're going to have ways to write your code and use different set of principles to get something done and actually lay out functionality. So for me personally, I like writing in TypeScript now in React. That's my bread and butter. I used to not like TypeScript at all. I thought it was just a lot of extra code that you didn't have to write, that the APIs will deal with, the data types that come back from the back end. But it's super beneficial to have TypeScript running on your front end. And the reason why this is because the APIs themselves, like if you don't have like a type setter on your API to your backend, what's going to happen is the data that you're getting on the front end, you don't know exactly what it is, right? To a beginner that don't know the queries that are on the back end and what kind of data that's coming through, you're going to just assume that, okay, this object has a string in it, or this is a data array, or this is a number. Sometimes that's not the case. So that's why it's always good to understand the backend architecture, especially like if you're dealing with like a particular project and you're working through building something from scratch or building something new. Always understand the backend architecture to see if there's any type safety going on the backend, and if there's not, and everybody's incorporating a TypeScript type methodology within their code, that you need to adhere to those same practices, because it's going to save you a lot of time when you're writing out your features going forward. What the types that the component should expect or the front end should expect, and what type of data that you're going to be using without guessing, right? Or using magic numbers. Like if your code base has magic numbers in it to where like 1 equals this status or 2 equals this status, right? Creating a enum type helps with that. Like you could just create a enum type file with different statuses in there that pertains to a particular area of your project. And you could just pull in that enum type and get rid of those magic numbers. So you know exactly what it is. I mean, it's clear cut as to what you're looking at. There's no guessing. So incorporating TypeScript has been a game changer. Like I said, it's been great working in TypeScript. It's definitely a learning curve as you start. But as you continue to do research and you do repetition and you keep writing your code, you're going to notice that it's going to be way easier. And you should have started a long time ago, like I did. So here are the 6 bad habits that a lot of beginners and some seniors still do to this day. Okay. But the first one I'm going to talk about is mostly for beginner to junior level. All right. You're running through the basics way too fast. What this means is whatever language that you're learning, you're going through coding tutorials, you're going on Stack Overflow, you're using AI as a tool to kind of help you break down how to write in the language that you're pursuing. What's going to happen is that you're going to get a lot of information. And when you're going, for example, if you're going through a tutorial, you're doing exactly what's happening at like in real time, right? What's going on in the tutorial on your end. So you're following the instructor on how to write this language. And as you're going through it, you're just listening to what the instructor is saying, but then also you're just typing out because it's going like either the instructor is going too fast or you're not grasping those key concepts. When you do this and you finish the tutorial, what's going to happen is you're going to forget a lot of those basics. You need to have like a time management mindset where you're doing 30 minutes to an hour at least. You take a break. If you want to go back into it, you can do it that way. But you're going to notice that you're going to retain a lot more information and you're going to have a lot more questions. You're going to be more engaged in terms of, okay, why is this code written this way? What exactly do I need to do to understand why the code is doing what it's doing? And not just based off of what the instructor is saying, I need to understand it for myself so that we're on the same page. So you don't run into this loop of, okay, I wrote this project, but then when someone asks you, okay, how do you explain exactly what your project is doing or what the code is doing behind the scenes? And you're sitting there in the deer in the headlights, like, I don't know. This if statement is doing this. Da, da, da. This is a problem. And this is why having the basic fundamentals is very, very important. I could tell you a story when I was actually looking for a job. I was transitioning into like another space, right? For me, I wanted to become more of a senior level developer or a full stack. I was getting interviews every week. I was doing the phone interviews and following up interviews. I was doing my due diligence to, find another gig. And I never forget there was this one job that I interviewed with. When the interview happened, the first interview, like everything was all good. The second interview was a coding interview. And the first part of it was to just add an object to an array and, combine different, like there's different objects in this array and you had to combine two of those objects to create a sentence. Super simple. All you have to do is either you could use a for each loop or you could do a dot map if you want to. For each loop is usually the way to go for me. So I wrote that past that part. Then it was the second part where you had to like assign, like there was something wrong with the output. It was showing the wrong state. And I was trying to figure out why that was. And it was like object.assign and this object, and it was using like three dots. And three dots in if you're using React and JSX, um, three dots is the spread operator. So basically what that means is instead of making a deep copy of an array to where you could manipulate it, because when you're dealing with state, you can't manipulate a state array. You have to make a copy of it because you're going to run into a lot of issues. And actually, I think React will show an error that this state is immutable, meaning that you can't edit it as a state. So what you would need to do to go around this error is basically create a spread operator for the state array, create another object, and then use and I'll show it on the screen, a bracket, right, as an array, and then three dots and whatever the state array is, which is your new copy. So I didn't understand that. And I got deducted points on that. And this is for like a senior level position. And I didn't get it. And it was because of that one thing I didn't understand. But then after that interview, I made sure to understand that concept. So if it came up again, I would know, okay, you use a spread operator. This is how you would copy state, especially like if it's an array, and add those contents to a new array. But this is why I feel like, and I'm telling you guys this is very, very important. Fundamentals are the key to success. If you don't know the fundamentals, you will get called out pretty quick. And if you're looking for a job right now, or if you're trying to transition into another role, from entry level to junior to senior, and then tech lead, technically, right? But that's years of experience. You have to master that. You're going to, you have to master the fundamentals. That's going to set you up for success in any project that you're working on, that whether it's not that complex versus super complex, the fundamentals is going to save you. It's not the new stuff. The fundamentals. The fundamentals is the building blocks to your success. It just is. No one gets in the door without the fundamentals. And if you do, you're a really good talker and you could really bullshit on a lot of things, or you showed off your projects and you understood them well and you practiced that. But then once you were put into like a real world situation, you folded. So the basics is very, very important. Second thing is not writing comments. I hate this. Writing comments in your code is beneficial when you're writing something super complex. And what I mean by this is you have like a recursive function that's doing an operation and you want to understand the flow of this recursive function when it starts to where it ends. And a recursive function basically calls it will do some processing, some data processing, and it will recall that function, the same function again, and then change the behavior and do the same thing until you hit like a condition where it stops. Now, if you're writing something that's super complex as that, you need to add comments for other developers to understand, the ones that you're working with, to understand exactly the flow of this function and what's going on. If there's a project that you wrote, that you helped write, and there's a lot of key elements in it that is needed for that project to function, you need to write comments where needs be. This goes for the front end and back end. I'm a big advocate for writing comments when it's super complex. Now, when it's something simple, like if I'm looking at a function in React, if I'm looking at a function that's dot filter, I know exactly what dot filter means. Dot filter is just basically you're filtering out data, or you're keeping data that you actually want in that array. Another thing is reduce. If you want to reduce a major data array into like a more simple one based off of certain conditions, that's a reducer. Super simple. But when it comes to calling a bunch of functions and doing a whole bunch of different conditions, that's where you need comments. So get into the habit of creating, when you're writing your code, write out comments to understand, not even for other developers to understand what you're writing, but also for your own sanity check. When you're working through some of these requirements, sometimes you're going to forget some of the basic fundamental, like not the basic fundamentals, but what actually is needed. So in essence, write comments where you need it. You don't necessarily need to write them all the time, but it does help when I'm looking at your code and I can't understand exactly what the flow is. Third thing is copy and pasting. When you're copying and pasting code from Stack Overflow, or you're using the AI tool like ChatGPT, Codium, or GitHub Copilot, sometimes it's not accurate. I've done this in the past where I just like, oh, this looks like exactly the problem I'm trying to solve. I copy and paste it and I try to manipulate that function. It doesn't work. And the reason is because I just assumed, based off of all of the green checks, that this would work in my scenario. You have to, at least with AI, you could reframe the question. And if you run into an error, like you get code back, you copy and paste it, it doesn't do exactly what you want it to do. So then you could reframe your question as to how do you update this to make it work like this. And sometimes it's accurate. Then there's other times it's a bunch of BS. Like there's times where I've used, for example, I'm using React Hook Form. I'm familiarizing myself with React Hook Form, which basically is a form library that allows you to control different input forms. It doesn't matter what framework you're using or a UI library. It has the ability to wrap itself around these different input fields and create an object of all the values that you need for those forms. And this is very beneficial when it comes to creating a bunch of state, or creating a state object that you have to manipulate at a time. It does all this for you. It uses custom hooks. It's great. If you're a React developer and you're working with React or Next.js and you're looking for like a form library, React Hook Form, go for it. So there's been times where I'm using React Hook Form and I'll go to AI, ChatGPT, and I'm like, hey, how do I go about finding all of the values that were changed in real time? And there is an object that React Hook Form has, but I didn't have instead of going through the documentation, I figured like ChatGPT would just give me the answer. So it writes out this entire answer and I'm looking at it. And I'm like, okay, so I'm just going to look at this and see if I can actually destructure it from the hook. I destructure it and it's there. But then what I didn't realize is that there's a separate function just to pull all the values that are changing in real time instead of like the actual initial values. So then I raised this question over to ChatGPT and I'm like, well, this didn't work for my case. Like if I use this function, this actually did what I wanted. You know what it said? It was like, yeah, that's right. Actually, you could use this function. So in essence, it just gave me a basic answer. And it was up to me to figure out whether that answer was actually definitive or not. And this is why beginners fail when they copy and paste code into their project and then they can't explain it. You have to have just a second opinion. Like, you can't just take whatever is out there as fact and apply it. When it comes to just researching on anything and trying to solve a problem, you have to take it with a grain of salt as to what someone posted on a forum or what AI is giving back to you. You could take it at like you could take that code and paste it and then kind of look at it and try to understand, okay, I understand why it went this way, but maybe it's not correct, and just manipulate it to a certain degree. Now, using Codium, which I think everybody should use, especially if you are a beginner, download Codium. I'll have a link in my description of this video, but you could use Codium. You could add it as an extension into your IDE. Visual Studio is what I use as my IDE. And it will allow you to, as you're writing code or functions, explain exactly what the function is doing. If you're writing like a bunch of if-else statements, for example, which is a bad habit, Codium would actually, there's a refactor option. And if you click that above the function that you're writing with all the if-else conditions, it will refactor the code for you. So it will give you a clear indication as to how to properly write code. And so I think that's beneficial. But to going back to the point, copy and pasting is not the way to go. Always having a second opinion. Try things, then manipulate the function that you're writing out, and don't just abandon it unless it's not solving the problem. So just be due diligent in terms of what you're using in your project. Another thing that's very common is ignoring errors. I don't see this with senior developers. I actually got called out on this before. There was a component that I wrote, and there was, for example, like type errors, right? They're like generic type errors for certain things. If you're creating like an object, and it sometimes, like with TypeScript, depending on the error, it is not really that big of a deal. It could be like you're looking for an initial object and you're waiting for the API to pull in that object. But then if you're trying to reference it in a conditional, what's going to happen is that TypeScript is going to say that it's undefined when in actuality you have checks to make sure that it's actually defined. So certain things like that. But then I realized, like, okay, I could really refactor this so that those errors doesn't pop up, and I was able to do that. That's a good check. But when it comes to like basic errors, like, for example, if you're using TypeScript and you're using a component that takes in a string instead of a number, and you get a type error for it, and you leave it as is, that's an error that you should fix. Instead of it being a number, change it to a string. Fixes that. The simple errors, you could fix that. If there's something in the console log as you're running your code that's like a warning, like, hey, this component might have a data leak or something like that, take care of it. Because if your component does have a data leak, what's going to happen is it's going to run slow and you're going to consume a lot of resources. So always check your errors. Anything that comes through on the console log of the browser, or just anything that's shown on the screen as an error, take care of it. Don't just leave it there, especially when you're dealing with TypeScript. Don't just add any to any type object, because that's terrible practice. Okay. The fifth thing is you are not practicing. I don't understand why, like, if you want to be a developer and you're trying to jump into tech and you're going through all these coding tutorials and you're getting burnt out and you're assuming that the tutorials is your practice, and you wonder why you're not retaining the information. It's super simple. You're doing too many tutorials. You're reading up on too many things. You're relying on AI too much. And as you're writing your projects, you're just getting burnt out. Like, you're not sticking with, when you start a new project, like say you finish a tutorial, right? You finish that. Then you start a new project and you want to build something from scratch. You're just looking at the computer like this. You just stare. Because you didn't give yourself enough time to process that information. And this happens with everybody. This is why I advocate, like I said in the beginning, 1 hour a day. at least 1 to 2 hours a day if you're up for it, and that's it. That's going to give you a lot of time to decompress and retain that information. So practice is a form of mastery. When it comes to me being a full stack developer, you know how many hours I had to practice to get here? It wasn't 24 hours I got here or like a month or two. This took years for me to get there. This is before AI. This is before actually using Stack Overflow as like, this is actually Stack Overflow was around. So using Stack Overflow to figure out problems and going through forums and blog posts to see if anybody ran into a particular problem and tried to solve it. Those were the times where you had to put in the work to get there. So I feel like AI is making it very easy for people to just get by, and it shows. It shows in a lot of the developers that are out there today, unfortunately. And this is why you guys need to make sure you practice. And you should only be using this as a tool, right? Practice makes perfect. 4 hours at least. For me personally, that's worked for me. Deep work, 4 hours. I'm working on something. If there's something that I don't know, I'm doing a research, and then I just apply and just do the same thing over and over again every single day. That's how you get good. Certain projects, you're going to notice that the more you practice, the more easy it would be to build something. And any project that you get, you're going to have more confidence every single time. You're going to sit there. I remember the first project that I had for the when I first started as a software developer, didn't have any idea how to write components. They were using React. Didn't have any idea how to write components, how to structure my code, none of that. I thought I knew it all. I got humbled. Once I understood that, I was like, I got to get a course on React. I have to understand the key fundamentals before I jump into something like this because I'm going to get left behind. That was the best investment I ever did. I used YouTube as like a guide to where I should be, but then ultimately I went to Udemy and I brought a course on React and understood the fundamentals. And then once I got really, really good, as I started to work on projects, what I did was, okay, just started like refactoring the projects that I did work on and then made it better and then kept iterating over that every single time. So now when it comes to the projects that I work on now, same day difference. I could sit there, I could look at the requirements. I'm like, okay, we could build this and build it. Just execute. Just pick the hardest thing that's in that list and then spend at least a day or two on it. And then everything else is just going to fall in line. So practice makes perfect. The more you practice, the more you're on the road to mastery and the more opportunities are going to open up to you. And then the last thing, this is the sixth thing, being afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Like it's not, it doesn't make you less of a person if you don't ask for help. The worst thing you could do is spend an hour on something you have no idea and you've been doing the research on it. And you're going to notice that you wasted a lot of time. You didn't get anywhere. And if you ask someone that has more experience, they're going to show you exactly where you're going wrong and give you constructive criticism. I think a lot of developers are scared of constructive criticism. It's the best form of getting better. Having someone to look at your code and be like, why did you write it this way? And say it in a certain way to where like, I understand why you went this route, but how about you try it this way? How about you write it in this standard because everybody else is doing it here and we don't want to accumulate tech debt within our project. How about you it's good that you wrote it this way, but then, here's a suggestion. Like something to that effect. If you have something that looks at your code and tells you that and doesn't, give you passive aggressive comments, then you're gonna succeed in that. But then being too hard on yourself is also detrimental to your ability to write better. So always ask for help. If it takes more than an hour, ask for help. This saved me a lot of time. And I'm glad I did it because there was a project that I was working on. I was like, yo, like, this is my first time working on, like I was using MySQL and understanding like stored procedures. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what tables are alike with each other based off of their foreign key and how to structure the query to where I could join on those tables and get the data that I need. Once I got to like 30 minutes to 45 minutes, I was like, I'm going to reach out to someone that has more experience. So reach out, got on a huddle, was like, hey, what am I doing wrong here? And got the answers quick. And it was something super simple too. So that's why I feel like having that ego to where you don't want to say anything, it's really bad. So reduce that ego, ask questions, reach out to people when you don't know anything, and having that mindset of not knowing anything is just going to make you a better student going forward, because we're all learning at the end of the day. We're all learning every single day. I can't tell you how many times I've learned something new every single day as being a full stack developer. I'm constantly figuring stuff out and learning new things. So, always ask for help. So that's the video in essence. Those are the 6 bad coding habits that you should take care of if you want to be successful. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I hope you guys get out the house, right? Especially if you're working remotely and you're in the office, do something. Do something. Like go to the gym, take a walk, just stay active. Like it's not all about coding at the end of the day. Okay. As you can see, I'm dressed for the gym. I'm about to do some legs today. This is like a daily routine for me. In the comments, I want to know, like, what are some of the bad coding habits that you have? If there's anything that you've done that's really stupid, please put it in the comments. It's a judgment-free zone. So that's the video. I'll talk to you guys later.